This week, how much of the Scottish Rite is based on or revolves around the concept of the Kabbalah? After a brief exploration here, we'll look at the true purpose of Masonry, ask ourselves a tough question. Is the diminishing membership actually a problem? Something that was asked in the 1930s. Does it still hold true today? All this and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode number 666. I want to thank our contributors, fellows, producers, and legacy partners of the WCY podcast. If you'd like to know more about how you can help this program bring Masonic education and philosophical education for that matter to those interested in the Royal Art, head on over to our website, wcypodcast.com, click on Support the Show, and check out the various options. Additionally, we have shops and other projects that you can explore on the website. Anything you buy or buy through links does benefit Masonic education and this podcast. So our thanks goes out to you in advance for any considerations. Presentations coming up February 20th. I'll be doing the Masonic Pub Crawl, Freemasonry in America and its Colonial Tavern Beginnings. I'll be doing this at Lake Lodge number 50 in Silver Lake, Kansas. On February 21st, I'll be premiering a brand new presentation called Mystical Legacies, unveiling the esoteric origins and historical implications of Atlantis, Lemuria, and beyond. The presentation is explorative in that we'll look at the mythical realms of Atlantis and Lemuria, examine their significance within many of the esoteric orders, including Theosophy and Freemasonry, and we'll delve into some of those romanticized narratives propagated by these traditions. And we'll take a look at some of the troubling ideologies that spring forth from all of this. June 7th, the San Antonio Esoteric Summit, and the weekend after that, of course, Esotericon. Tickets are on sale right now. You can head on over to esotericon.net, pick up your tickets. I'll be there in person, not presenting, but I will have my shop open. And I'll be there, hanging out, listening to the presentations, selling some wares, all of that great stuff. So I hope to see you there. And also, I'll see many of you out at Masonic Week happening the week after next. And while I'm there, I will be presenting at Brother Joe Martinez's lodge. They moved their stated meeting due to the Virginia Grand Lodge Leadership Conference on Friday, so they'll be meeting on Wednesday. And I'll be doing a shortened 20-minute version of the Masonic Pub Crawl for the lodge because there will also be additional education happening by another brother. So we're really looking forward to that and doing some collaborative efforts there, bringing some additional light to the Manassas, Virginia region. Not that it needs any help. Brother Joe Martinez does a fantastic job out there and can't thank him enough for the opportunity to present and to share in some fellowship. So, with all that out of the way, we've got two pieces this week, and the first one I wanted to read is called The Kabbalah in Scottish Rite Freemasonry, One Man's Viewpoint, and this is by H.B. Parks, Ph.D., DDS, 32nd degree, coming out of Austin, Texas. This was printed in the New Age magazine from 1950. Albert Pike devotes some 90-odd pages to the teachings of the Kabbalah. References to this ancient literature start as early as the apprentice degree and are progressively increased until the Master of the Royal Secret, or 32nd degree, is closed. It would be well for Scottish Rite Freemasons to investigate the essential teachings of the Kabbalah so often mentioned by Albert Pike. To those who are interested, the Kabbalah consists of the Book of the Zohar, which in turn has the following parts: the Sefer Zithnuta, or the Book of Concealed Mystery, the Greater Holy Assembly, and the Lesser Holy Assembly, and the Sefer Yetzirah. Reference to the Book of the Zohar and its various parts occurs more than 150 times in Morals and Dogma. Admission is made by Albert Pike that Freemasonry is a search after light. That search leads us directly back, as you see, to the Kabbalah, quote-unquote. The Tree of Life, a symbol used in all Kabbalistic work, is clearly figured by him. This system is also seen on the Latin patents, as well as on the English patents of more recent date. The easiest to find the word Hakmah or Chokmah, which means wisdom. This is the name of the second Sephiroth of the Kabbalah. The elements of Kabbalism, which can be used in Scottish Rite Freemasonry, consist of 10 ciphers, 22 letters, a triangle, a square, and a circle. This is the summation of the entire Sephira Yitzra, mentioned very frequently. The use of the tarot, or rota, or tarot plan is made evident throughout the entire Scottish Rite degrees, with special reference to the 32nd degrees or paths, these being related to the 32 paths of wisdom of the Sephira Yitzra of the Kabbalah. Scottish Rite degrees, in which the Kabbalah is discussed in part or the entire degree is based thereon, are as follows: Degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, 14, 17, 18, 19, 25, 26, 28, 29, and 32. To those who are interested and will read The Knight of the Sun and The Master of the Royal Secret with Kabbalism in mind, will be surprised to find the entire system of the Kabbalah outlined and its direct relation to Scottish Rite philosophy clearly propounded. Considering the above evidence, the point is well driven home that Masonry has a history, a literature, and a philosophy. So why should we not, as Scottish Rite Freemasons, investigate or reinvestigate the Kabbalah and its philosophy, so loved by Albert Pike? Loved this little piece. I think the author sort of leads the audience to perhaps one of his other fancies. When he starts talking about tarot and tarota, it's pretty clear when he talks about these 32 different paths. The diagram from Boda, or Builders of the Adytum, comes to mind, so perhaps he was well versed in that system, which was started in the mid-20s by, of course, Paul Foster Case, who was a Freemason, former member of the Golden Dawn, and part of the liberal Catholic Church as well. That last bit is a little bit troubling, but apparently no relation to, or I should say not no relation, but no known correspondences between Charles Ledbetter and, of course, some of the other troubling individuals that were members of that particular denomination. I wasn't going to read this, but I think it was only a couple paragraphs, and so I thought, hey, it's on the same page, and we might as well read it. It also involves the Scottish Rite, and is just 3 paragraphs on the Scottish Rite rings. So here we go. Scottish Rite rings. There are 2 official rings in the Scottish Rite of the Southern jurisdiction. The first is that of the 14th degree, and it is a plain band ring having imposed upon the equilateral triangle containing the Hebrew letter Yod, the initial of the deity in Hebrew. This ring is required to be given to each 14th degree Mason without cost to him by the Lodge of Perfection, of which he becomes a member. The other ring is the 33rd degree official ring. It consists of 3 narrow rings joined together in one, either plain or having imposed upon it the equilateral triangle containing the figures 33. If a brother wants one of these rings, he is supposed to have it made and pay for it. These rings may be worn on any finger of either hand, as it suits the pleasure of the wearer. There is no regulation as to whether the apex of the equilateral triangle should point toward the wearer or away from him. It is optional with him. Hey, that's kind of cool. We're at a point now, I think, that the world has gone by and is all done with points in or points out. Or are we? We can start a new one regarding our Scottish Rite rings. But as you guys probably all know, I'm a points out kind of guy. I like to advertise the fraternity. Next up is a longer piece and comes out of the Square and Compass magazine, a journal of Masonry, which was started back in 1892. This comes out of the February 1937 issue. The title of the piece is called The Mission of Masonry by Frater Henricus, or Henricus. From many sources we hear the query, what is Masonry doing of value? If you could believe the lamentations from various semi-official sources, Masonry has run its course, has outlived its usefulness, and is on the rocks because of its loss in membership. This last statement is one of the most encouraging indications in the condition of the craft. And, as to the first, Masonry would be far better off if it lost from its roles some of its superficial thinkers who would convert it into a political machine or embroil it in a new crusade of their own making. Such have kicked up so much dust that the membership has to a degree lost sight of the first landmark. What came you here to do? Masonry has suffered more at the hands of its own votaries, who were not first prepared in their own hearts, than it has even from its traditional enemy. Time out of mind, we have had it dinned into our ears by our fathers that what we want is quality and not quantity, that investigating committees were not doing their duty, that the black cube was not used sufficiently, that the cloak of respectability of the lodge had too often covered the black sheep and those of moral obliquity. Very unfortunately, the desire to keep up with the Joneses has, by catering to our vanity, been a milestone of debt about our neck in the erection and upkeep of temples, so that we gloss over, as of little account, the importance of truthful reply to the questions asked of the candidate in the preparation room. Some of the quote-unquote old fogies who have the sincere good of the order at heart are heard to voice the belief that a blessing for us in disguise would be another Morgan episode. We are too popular. We are too respectable. We might add, we are too pharisaical. This appears to be the age of broken promises and oaths of obligation, when it is fashionable to lie, cheat, and disassemble, when it is the proper thing under advice of counsel to go contrary to all the laws on the statute books, provided we are not caught. The Masonic fraternity, in common with the world, has pulled a party and is suffering the effects of the morning after the night before. It is contrary to the present-day rule of action to appeal to history or experience, and yet there never was a truer proverb than, quote-unquote, experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other. At the risk of being considered outmoded, let us consider the position of Masonry during the brief period of the past 20 years. Most members have lived that span, so that there is no necessity for invoking antiquity. When the United States entered the World War, there was a run of the bank for applications for the degrees. Fathers, mothers, wives, and daughters insisted that their loved ones who had entered the service should, quote-unquote, join Masonry. They did it with the unthinking belief that the magic of Masonic membership would induce greater clemency in prison camps and turn aside the guns of the firing squads. Masons and Masonry lost their heads, attempted little real investigation of the character of the applicant, or questioned whether he freely and voluntarily offered himself a candidate for the mysteries, whether a proper time had elapsed between the degrees, and if in each one he had been properly prepared and instructed. The degree mills were kept grinding day and night, and the crime of it was we sent those young men out, many of them to their deaths, with a lie upon their lips. We led them into it. We condoned their moral offense. But, quote-unquote, chickens invariably come home to roost. Ask the secretary of any lodge to go back in his roster and note the names of those who were, quote-unquote, initiated during those hectic days, and then turn to the pages of today and see how many of those still living, those high-pressured candidates, are still carried on the rolls, as well as how many of them had charges preferred against them for non-payment of dues or for more flagrant offenses. Does the responsibility for this condition lie at their door or at ours? Certainly Masonry then thought it was doing something of value, and the increase in numbers was phenomenal. Again, experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other. So during the fabulous 20s, we reenacted the same play with a few changes in the cast and a new set of stage setting. In other words, we had become better salesmen, which was highly necessary in view of the increased cost of living, reflected in the dues and fees for the degrees. During that time of gambling and futures, when every man was a potential millionaire and promoters of get-rich schemes were so plentiful that they had to wear badges to distinguish them from their prey, a very potent qualification for a directorship of a mushroom company was that of being a quote-unquote high-up Mason. How many of those shooting stars are still in evidence, and how many have been boarding at the expense of the government? Do you think in your heart of hearts that Masonry has suffered greatly by a decrease in membership? If you are still obsessed on that point, it might be suggested that you go into the character rather deeply from a Masonic standpoint of each member who has, in one way or another, served his connection. The result of your investigation may prove somewhat of a surprise to you. Inasmuch as the first shall be the last, let us now give some consideration to what is Masonry doing of value. Before going into this, it is necessary for us to agree upon a certain axiom as to what Masonry teaches and what it does not teach. If we know our work fairly well, this should be easy of proof. What the world needs most is men of character, old-fashioned Masons. There has never been an overproduction of that nature. In fact, not nearly enough to supply the market, and the price is going up. Character is vastly more important to the welfare of the world than any treaty we may make with foreign countries, and law passed by Congress or any edict by any president. Masonry conducts an opportunity school for the building of character. An opportunity school is one that students enter because they have a sincere desire to learn, not because they are compelled to attend it. It is free, and if the lessons are put into practice, it means a future and a life work for its graduates. Can the average Mason say that he is still a member because he has a sincere wish of being serviceable to his fellow creatures? For benefit of the uplifters of the craft, it would appear as though there was a vast virgin territory for them to cultivate, and to make of Masonry a thing of value, as well as to preach a new crusade. There is ample opportunity for teaching and preaching, what the Grand Commander has called homely virtues. Regardless of how we may sugarcoat the dose, the chief function of Masonry is that of teacher. If he understands his vocation, a teacher is necessarily a builder. Masonry is or should be a builder of character, and the character of its inhabitants is supremely important to a country and of unsurpassing value to the state. It is far superior to material goods than diamonds, rubies, gold, or silver. If the character of its people disintegrates, the state decays and falls, as did Rome. In this day of waning faith and laxity in morals, Masonry is almost our only hope for recovery. Masonry presents us with the working tools and teaches us their use, but it is the duty, and it should be the pleasure of every true Mason, to use those tools, and by his individual exhibition of character, to save our civilization from disaster. This should be a sacred crusade of the order. The three major bodies of Masonry have each a distinct function to perform in the building of character. There should be no dissension among them, but rather that emulation of who can best work and best agree. The Lodge is preeminently a teacher of ethics and morality. For many years it was distinctly a Christian organization until the time came when, in its wisdom, it broadened its scope in an order that it might bring its message to men of every faith. It works in harmony with the basic principles of every form of religion for the upbuilding of character. Due to a mistaken idea of popularizing it, the Lodge of recent years has stepped outside of its true destiny and entered fields entirely foreign to its teaching. During the trying times we have been experiencing, it has staged a comeback which has been the means of strengthening many a faltering spirit and inspired them to carry on in the face of trouble. In its proper sphere, it should not scatter or dissipate its influence by engaging in too many sidelines. It should press forward with the diamond point of the selection of a good material and making of them stones, surpassing value in the temple of civilization. The Templar order is devoutly and should be militantly Christian, not the Christianity of narrow conception of sects, but a broad toleration of minor and unimportant points stressed by hair-splitting theologians. It should endeavor to live in accordance with the teachings of its great master, who trod barefoot the dusty highways of Galilee. It should teach in season and out of season a desire to emulate the character of him who went about doing good. Unless it vows its obligations and its degrees are grossly misinterpreted, the great object of Scottish Freemasonry is to inculcate in its votaries a love of their country, a true patriot of intense loyalty to the principles symbolically represented by the Star-Spangled Banner. It stands for freedom of thought and conscience, a freedom from wrong shackles of law, and above all, a freedom from any form of human dictatorship. If we loved our country with the devotion of William Tell, a George Washington, or an Albert Pike, or an Abraham Lincoln, we would show forth in our daily life the character building so forcefully demonstrated in those marvelous degrees, and, if necessary, lay down our lives in the defense of its principles. This, it would appear, is the true function of Scottish Freemasonry. Love thou thy land with love far brought from the storied past. Birds of a feather flock together. If we believe in and live the principles enunciated, we shall not lack candidates. Our doors will be once more thronged with those worthwhile and having the same desire with us, and we shall become a power for good in the land. In all things, let our motto be one for all and all for one. Will you, my brother, enlist? So there you have this piece, again coming from February 1937. What's interesting is, a lot of these pieces we read and coming from Square and Compass and even the Scottish Rite publication New Age, it is something totally wild and probably unthinkable to the modern Mason what is actually contained in many of these publications. Very political statements, concerns about certain things happening within government and whatnot. And in this particular piece, we're talking about the mission of Masonry, where this man basically says, hey, there's a mission at stake. We've let too many people in. And by the way, the continuing decline of membership in 1937 was a good thing. I wonder what this brother would think today. I also think that dwindling numbers isn't a bad thing. I like the idea of coming back to the idea of a select few. It just aids our ability to get to know each other. It aids in the ability to focus the work. And I think once Masonry can get its head on straight, then they can probably work on some of the challenges of changing the world. We have to be able to walk before we can run, and right now it seems as though we can't even run administratively, let alone run a lodge or keep your lodge open. So lodges are really focusing on administrative things that surround itself with keeping the actual physical building, lodge, and the fraternity healthy rather than doing Masonry. So I hope that makes sense. But I do want to read you just a few titles of some of the articles that appeared in Masonic publications back in the 50s. Something that I think you will find incredibly interesting and eye-opening and maybe startling and concerning. And what I mean by this is that these are articles that could be largely considered political today, where Masonry has an opinion. So here are just a few article titles from one issue of the New Age, published in September 1950. Who inspects parochial schools to see that they conform? What competent authority says on communism? Paul Blanchard discusses the United States of American and Vatican relations. A dual America. Roman Church persists in seeking federal aid. Chief Justice Marshall, Mason and lawgiver. Parochial schools are not by any ruse public schools. A world federal government. Counterfeit currency. Dixon, New Mexico case, appeal in the Supreme Court. Who saved Andrew Johnson from a vote of impeachment? The Federal Bureau of Espionage. God's Plan in America. There you have some simple titles just from one issue. Believe me, they go far beyond that in scope, and if you think it's just the title, you are mistaken. There are a number of articles that I would love to read from these magazines, however, at the risk of perhaps moving into the realms of politics, which I've done before, but on my own terms. Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope you all enjoyed. We'll talk to you all next week. We'll have great education for you once more. Hope to see you all in Masonic Week down there in Crystal City. And if I don't see you there, maybe I'll see you at one of the other places. I'll be traveling all throughout February. So, anyway, until next week, stay on the level for Whence Came You. I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
WCY Media.
Why, that meet me as not the